There's just nothing like a cold glass of draft beer, and especially the taste that's captured in every glass of Budweiser draft. One glass and you'll know why. This is the king of beers.
Beer, an American icon, cornerstone of society, the people's drink. Whether on a warm summer day, at your favorite neighborhood bar, or just a night on the town, beer has been a staple in American culture for generations.
There he was, just walking down the street singing, do-I-diddy-diddy-dum-diddy-do.
Men and women, young
and
old,
what are you doing? What are you doing?
people of all kinds have enjoyed the refreshing taste of beer since its conception. And they all remember their first.
When I was your age, my dad shared a beer with me, and I thought it was about the best thing in the world.
So the first beer I ever had.
Are you familiar with the beer bong?
Probably not terribly memorable.
Skunked Busch Light.
My grandpa used to give all the babies a splash of Busch Light or something just to watch them grimace.
Didn't go down that easy.
I didn't really drink as much as injected it into my stomach.
I was a Heineken. I was in Spain, so technically I was not underage.
You gotta start somewhere.
Let's pause a second. In order to look at the current state of beer, we have to go back, all the way to the beginning. Okay, too far. That's more like it. In the year 4300 BC, Babylonian clay tablets detailed recipes for beer. At this time, beer was an integral part of Babylonian, Assyrian, Egyptian, Hebrew, Chinese, and Inca cultures.
Bread and 2 of this little fish. And a mug of dark beer to wash it down.
A mere 5,886 years later, the first beer was brewed in the New World. Sir Walter Raleigh of Virginia became the first of the European settlers to brew their own beer in the US. However, it did not receive rave reviews.
Boo, you stink!
In 1620, the Pilgrims famously landed at Plymouth Rock. What you may not know is that it was because they were running low on beer. From then on, beer in America grew tremendously, to the point where there were approximately 2,300 breweries in the country. That is, until Prohibition. In 1920, the United States issued a constitutional ban on any and all alcoholic beverages. Up until the final year of Prohibition in 1933, the amount of U.S. breweries dropped to just 160. 2 years later, one of beer's biggest innovations was introduced to the world as the first cans hit the shelves. And by 1964, Budweiser became the first brand to sell 10 million barrels in a single year. And then everything changed.
Afternoon, everybody.
Darling, you got to let me know. Should I stay or should I go? If you say that you are mine, I'll be here till the end of time.
There were probably 2 or 3 dozen breweries in the entire U.S.
78 or 79 was the worst point for beer in the US ever, because it was 50 breweries producing maybe 100 different beers, and that was it. The landscape was completely different than it is now.
Kind of goes back to the 80s. I think it really took off then. First wave of everything was late 80s through early 90s.
President Carter, he signed a bill that basically took away what's called an excise tax made on the production of beer.
And then Sierra and Anchor Steam kind of started everything back up. Sam Adams in there too, of course.
Why is American beer like making love in a canoe? Because it's close to water.
They started using flavorful hops, using malted barley, making beer the way it was supposed to be made.
I think this most recent wave is really when American beer really established itself. It's redefining beer itself.
I think you gotta look at it as it's stronger than it's ever been. I mean, the industry's exploded.
The brewing industry is stronger than at any time in the history of the country.
The biggest difference between today and 30, 40 years ago, it's accessibility to beer, fresh beer.
Almost everywhere I go on vacation with my family or traveling for business or anything, you can find good beer. And it's kind of amazing.
It forces you into recognizing the importance of quality and reliability. You got to make sure the beers taste good and are consistent.
There's so many little things that kind of compounded themselves and turned beer into this great, tasty thing that it is now.
As the beer industry has grown over the years, not only has the product itself evolved, but also the way we view it, in all shapes, forms, and sizes.
It's more than just a slick line or even a clever name. It's got to exude a bigger story.
I would say people do take more risks out there like that most interesting man in the world. I mean, that's a pretty bold thing to put out there as an ad campaign. Budweiser Frogs or Dilly Dilly. Those guys have done that and are part of that pop culture.
You can't understate the effect that the internet has had on beer, the way it's sold and the consumer side of things.
Through things like Untapped and Rate Beer, before Rate Beer and Beer Advocate.
Those kind of started the word of mouth trend and broadened it to anybody who had access.
And in the age of social media, gone are the days of the one-dimensional beer consumer.
Morty, come on.
Well, for the most part.
It's not just your average Joe Six-Pack who wants a beer at the end of the day.
It's definitely not your stereotypical beer drinker. It's not like all Homer Simpsons.
No TV and no beer make Homer something.
Go crazy?
Don't mind if I do!
It's definitely a much more diverse crowd, certainly than it used to be.
Beer's approachable and there's a whole lot of variety.
People care about what they drink and want to have something that is high quality and meets every occasion.
People are starting to realize that there's a whole world of craft light lagers, and there's craft kettle sour beers that taste great on a summer day, and craft doesn't have to be big or high alcohol or intimidating or anything.
Is it nutty? Is it foamy? Is it hoppy? Does it have a surprisingly fruity note which lingers on the tongue?
It's beer.
We've covered the history, the advertising, the new age customer. I guess that means there's only one place left for us to go.
I think the future is actually pretty bright.
There'll always be new and interesting hops. I think yeast is really something that's kind of on the forefront.
That yeast development to try to get a lot more hybrid style yeast. You can turn lagers out in 2 weeks.
DNA testing at our fingertips to check for spoilage. Those more advanced lab components, I think that's really going to help a lot of people.
Maybe there will be some type of innovation in extending your shelf life by that much more. So some of these IPAs taste as good 2 months old as they do in the first week.
The more you know about what you're doing and what's going into that can, the more reliable you're going to be about it.
So, beer isn't going away?
Hope not. Beer's been here for a long time. I think it's as popular as it's ever been.
Beer's not going away. There's no way.
Pretty dismal to be like, nah, beer's screwed. I'm getting out and going and buying a fishing boat. Yeah, I definitely think that there's plenty of room for growth and a really cool future.
I think the possibilities are endless in terms of how many different beers there will be and how many different ideas. I think there's always going to be something interesting.
As long as we've been a nation and as long as people have been able to grow grain, beer has been a very big part of not only our lives, but people's lives around the world.
There you have it, folks. Beer is in our past, it's in the present, and it is certainly part of our future. Now get off your phone, go out, and grab a cold one. Cheers.
Woo! Red Solo Cup, I fill you up. Let's have a party.